The vampire king stood at the head of the marble stairs and felt nothing. Below him, the choosing hall of Bucharest's oldest court stretched like a showroom floor, chandeliers casting honeyed light across 41 young women arranged in ascending order of silk quality. The chamberlain beside him, a thin vampire named Doran, with silver spectacles perched on his narrow nose, read from his clipboard in a voice pitched for discretion. Lady Anastasia Volkov, third from the left. Emerald silk, Venetian lace, education in 3 languages. Dowry includes mining interests in the Carpathians. Doran's finger traced down the page. Lady Margot Delacroix, center position. Parisian couture, conservatory training, extensive political connections through her mother's line. Hadrian Penrose, who had ruled the Eastern European covens for 237 years, let the words wash over him like elevator music. Each woman stood motionless, posture perfect, faces arranged in expressions somewhere between demure interest and calculated allure. Their gowns cost more than most families earned in a decade. Their hair had been styled by professionals. Their perfumes mingled into a cloying cloud that made him wish he still needed to breathe. This was the 3rd choosing ceremony in as many centuries. The council insisted. A king needed a queen, they said. Stability required it. The bloodlines must continue, alliances must be forged, the old families must be appeased. Hadrian found the entire exercise exhausting. Lady Katerina Brennan, position 7, rose silk, Irish lineage, notable for Doran. Hadrian interrupted quietly. Who is that? The chamberlain's recitation stopped mid-syllable. His eyes followed Hadrian's gaze, then widened slightly. Your Majesty, that is not part of the presentation. I did not ask what it was part of. I asked who she is. Behind the last row of silk-draped nobles, moving quickly with her head down and her arms full of folded linen, a girl in a patched gray work dress hurried toward the servants' exit. Her hair was pulled back in a simple braid, dark and unadorned. Her dress had been mended so many times the original fabric was barely visible beneath the repairs. She kept her eyes on the floor, clearly trying to make herself invisible as she completed whatever errand had brought her through the ceremony hall. A laundress, Your Majesty. The palace employs several. I can have her removed if her presence is no. Hadrian's voice carried no particular inflection, but Doran's mouth clicked shut immediately. Continue. But Hadrian was not listening anymore. He watched the girl reach the exit, paused to shift the heavy linens in her arms, and slip through the door. The whole journey had taken perhaps 20 seconds. She had not looked up once. The ceremony continued for another hour. Hadrian descended the stairs at the appointed time, spoke briefly with 12 of the assembled ladies as protocol demanded, and retired to his chambers having made no selection. The council would be irritated, but they had been irritated with him for decades. It was a sustainable state of affairs. He did not think about the laundress again until the following morning, when he found himself unable to sleep despite the heavy curtains blocking every trace of dawnlight. Insomnia was not supposed to affect vampires, but Hadrian had learned that immortality did not cure restlessness, only drew it out over longer periods. He dressed in dark trousers and a simple shirt, forgone the formal robes his station required, and walked the palace corridors in the pre-dawn silence. Most of the court slept during daylight hours, but the palace itself never truly rested. Somewhere, humans cleaned and cooked and maintained the vast machinery that kept the court running. He found himself in the lower levels, where the servant quarters and working rooms spread through the old stone foundations. The air here smelled of soap and starch and wood smoke. He turned a corner and heard voices. "Please, you can't. It's too much. I couldn't possibly. You're shaking. And you tore your dress yesterday during the presentation. You can't go back in there tomorrow wearing that." Hadrian stopped, staying back in the shadows of the corridor. Through an open doorway, he could see into a laundry room, where 2 young women stood among hanging sheets and steaming tubs. One wore a beautiful dress of pale blue silk, clearly one of the ladies from the choosing ceremony. She was crying. The other was the girl in the patched gray dress. "Lady Helena," the laundress said gently, "you need this more than I do. The ceremony continues tonight. If you appear in a torn dress, your family will be humiliated. Take it." "But this is your dress." Your only good dress. What will you wear? The laundress smiled, and Hadrian felt something shift in his chest, a sensation he had not experienced in decades. I work in the laundry. No one notices what I wear, but they will notice you. Take it, please. I altered it last night to fit you. Lady Helena took the offered dress with trembling hands. It was simple compared to what the other nobles wore, but beautifully made deep green cotton with careful embroidery at the collar. I will pay you back. I swear it. My family, we've had some setbacks, but I do not want payment. I want you to walk into that hall tonight with your head up. The laundress squeezed the other girl's hand. You deserve to be there as much as any of them. Lady Helena embraced her quickly, then fled, clutching the dress. The laundress stood alone in the laundry room for a moment, looking down at her patched work dress, then shook her head and turned back to the washtubs. Hadrian stood in the corridor for a long time after that, thinking. That evening, when the choosing ceremony reconvened, he descended the marble stairs without waiting for Doran's recitation. The assembled ladies straightened, hope and calculation flickering across 41 faces. Lady Helena stood near the back in her borrowed green dress, looking significantly more composed than she had that morning. Hadrian walked past the first row, past the second, past women in silk and satin and lace, past diamonds and pearls and elaborate coiffures. The room fell silent, the kind of silence that feels like pressure against the eardrums. He saw her then, crossing behind the nobles again with an armload of fresh linens. Same patched dress, same downcast eyes, same hurried pace. You there, he called, in the gray dress. The girl froze. Every head in the room turned. Hadrian heard gasps, whispers, the rustle of expensive fabric as the nobles shifted to see. The laundress turned slowly, still holding the linens. Her face was pale, her eyes wide. She looked terrified. Hadrian descended the remaining stairs and crossed the floor. The nobles parted before him. He stopped a few feet from the girl, who was now visibly trembling. Your name, he said quietly. Grace, Your Majesty. Grace Calloway. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. Grace Calloway. Hadrian studied her. Up close he could see she was younger than he had thought, perhaps 20, with brown eyes and a dusting of freckles across her nose. Her hands were red and rough from laundry work. Her dress had been patched so many times it was more patch than original fabric. Do you know why I called you? No, Your Majesty. I apologize if I disturbed the ceremony. I did not mean to. You gave your dress away. Grace's mouth opened, closed. Your Majesty? This morning, you gave your only good dress to Lady Helena Brennan. Hadrian kept his voice level, but he was aware that everyone in the hall could hear. Why? She needed it more than I did. It was your dress. You earned the money to buy it through your work. Grace's chin came up slightly, just a fraction, some spark of defiance or pride. Yes, which means it was mine to give away if I chose. Hadrian heard scandalized murmurs rippling through the assembled nobles. Doran was making a faint choking sound somewhere behind him. He ignored all of it. You are correct. He took a breath. Unnecessary but old habits died hard, and then did something he had not done in 2 centuries. He lowered himself to one knee before a human. The silence in the hall became absolute. Grace Calloway, Hadrian said clearly. I would be honored if you would consent to be considered as a potential consort to the throne. Grace stared at him. The linen slipped from her arms and tumbled to the floor. What? You heard me. But Your Majesty, I work in the laundry. I'm no one. Those women, they're nobles, they're educated, They are here because their families sent them to secure political advantage, Hadrian said quietly. You are here because you had work to do. That is a significantly better qualification in my estimation. This is insane. Probably, Hadrian agreed. He rose to his feet. You may refuse, of course. No obligation is incurred by my request. But I would like the opportunity to know you better, if you are willing. Grace looked at him, then at the assembled nobles, then back at him. Her hands twisted in her skirt. I don't understand what's happening. That makes two of us. Hadrian allowed himself a small smile. But I would like to find out. Will you have dinner with me tomorrow evening? I work until 8. Then we will dine at 9. Grace hesitated, then nodded once, jerkily. All right, yes, 9 o'clock. Thank you. Hadrian inclined his head, then turned and walked back toward the stairs. As he passed Doran, he murmured, I believe the ceremony is concluded. Please inform the council that I have made my selection. Doran looked as though he might faint. Your Majesty, this is highly irregular. The protocols, the bloodline requirements, the council will never. The council, Hadrian said pleasantly, can schedule an appointment to discuss their concerns with me at their convenience. Good evening, Doran. He left the hall. Behind him, chaos erupted in whispers and raised voices and the rustle of 41 silk gowns. Hadrian did not care. For the first time in decades, he felt something other than hollow tedium. It was not much, barely a flicker, but it was there. He wondered what Grace Calloway would wear to dinner. Grace did not sleep that night. She lay on her narrow cot in the servants' quarters, staring at the ceiling and trying to make sense of what had happened. The vampire king had knelt to her, in front of everyone, had asked to have dinner with her. It was absurd. It was impossible. It was the kind of thing that happened in fairy tales, and Grace had stopped believing in fairy tales when she was 8 years old and her parents died of fever, leaving her alone with nothing but debts and a strong back for work. You are out of your mind if you think you are going to that dinner. Grace turned her head. In the cot beside hers, Mari was propped on one elbow, glaring. Mari had worked in the palace laundry for 5 years, 3 years longer than Grace. She was 25, sharp-tongued, and the closest thing Grace had to family. I told him I would, Grace said. So tell him you changed your mind. Grace, this is dangerous. Do you understand? That is not some merchant's son taking a fancy to a pretty girl. That is the vampire king. He could kill you with one hand. He drinks blood. He is 200 years old. 237, Grace corrected. She had looked it up in the palace library that afternoon, sneaking in during her lunch break. He was turned in 1789, French originally, moved east during the Napoleonic Wars. Mari groaned. That does not make this better. I know it does not. Grace sat up, wrapping her arms around her knees. Mari, I know this is insane, but he asked me to dinner. One dinner. What harm can it do? What harm? Grace, half the noble ladies in that hall would poison you in your sleep if they thought they could get away with it. You humiliated them. You, a laundress in a patched dress, chosen over all of them. I was not chosen. He asked me to dinner. It is the same thing, and you know it. Mari's expression softened. I am not trying to be cruel. I am trying to keep you alive. These people, the vampires and the nobles and the whole court system, they play games we cannot even see. You are a pawn now, whether you want to be or not. The smartest thing you can do is remove yourself from the board. Grace was quiet for a long moment. He knelt, she said finally. Did you hear about that part? He knelt to me. Kings do not kneel. Which is exactly why you should be terrified. Maybe Mari was right. Probably Mari was right. But Grace remembered the vampire king's eyes, dark and ancient and sad, and the way he had spoken to her as though her answer actually mattered. As though she was not just a piece on a board, but a person whose choices had weight. One dinner, Grace said. After that, if I want to walk away, I will walk away. But I have to at least see what this is. Mari sighed. You are going to get your heart broken at best, and murdered at worst. Probably. And you are going through with it anyway. Yes, you are an idiot. I know. Mari flopped back onto her cot. Fine, but I am coming with you to help you dress, and if he tries anything, you scream. I will be listening. Grace smiled despite herself. Thank you, Mari. Do not thank me. Save that for after you survive. The next evening, Grace stood outside the private dining room in the East Wing and seriously considered running. She wore her work dress because it was all she had. Mari had done her best, pressing it carefully and fixing a torn seam, but there was only so much that could be done with fabric that had been washed and patched 100 times. Grace's hair was braided simply down her back. She had no jewelry, no cosmetics, no perfume. She felt like a child playing dress-up in a world that belonged to adults. The door opened. A human servant, elderly and dignified, bowed slightly. "Miss Calloway, His Majesty is expecting you." Grace followed him inside. The dining room was smaller than she had expected, more intimate. A table was set for two beside a window overlooking the city lights of Bucharest. Hadrian stood when she entered, and Grace was struck again by how profoundly otherworldly he looked. White hair pulled back loosely, pale skin that seemed to glow faintly in the candlelight, eyes so dark they were nearly black. He wore simple clothes, dark trousers and a white shirt, but he moved with a grace that made every gesture look choreographed. "Grace, thank you for coming," he gestured to the table. "Please sit." Grace sat. The servant poured wine for her. Water for Hadrian vampires did not drink wine. She knew that much, and then departed silently. They looked at each other across the table. "This is awkward," Hadrian said. Grace felt a startled laugh escape her. "Yes, it really is. I apologize. I have not done this in a very long time, and I was not particularly good at it even then." Hadrian leaned back in his chair. "Would it help if I explained what I am thinking?" "That would help enormously, yes." "All right." Hadrian folded his hands on the table. "The choosing ceremony is a political exercise. It is theater designed to placate the noble families and convince them they have influence over the crown. In reality, I have no intention of selecting a bride based on which family offers the largest dowry or the most strategic alliance. I find the entire proceeding distasteful." "Then why hold it at all?" "Because the council insists, and because sometimes it is easier to appear to cooperate than to fight every battle. But this year, I watched you give your dress away to a frightened girl who needed it, and I thought, here is someone who makes decisions based on what is right rather than what is advantageous. That is rare, Grace, especially in this world." Grace took a sip of wine to buy time. It was excellent wine, probably older than she was. "So you knelt to me to make a point to the council?" "No. I knelt to you because I wanted to, and because I have not wanted to do anything in a very long time." Hadrian's expression was difficult to read. "I am not offering you a fairy tale, Grace. I am offering you a choice. I would like to spend time with you, to know you, to see if there is any foundation for something real. But you should know what you are stepping into. The court is dangerous. The politics are vicious. Many people will hate you simply for existing in a space they believe you do not deserve. And I am not human. I will never be human. What I am, what I need to survive, those things do not change. You are trying to scare me off. I am trying to be honest." Grace studied him. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything." "When you watch me, what do you see?" Hadrian was quiet for a moment. "I see someone who works until her hands bleed and still has enough compassion left to help a stranger. I see someone who does not want to be invisible but has learned to make herself small to survive. I see someone who is terrified right now but came to dinner anyway because she is braver than she thinks she is." He paused. "What do you see when you look at me?" Grace considered that. "I see someone who is very tired. Someone who has lived too long doing things he does not believe in. Someone who knelt in front of a room full of people because he was tired of pretending." "That is remarkably accurate. So what do we do now?" "Now," Hadrian said, "we have dinner, and we talk, and we see if we enjoy each other's company. Nothing more complicated than that." The food arrived then, carried by silent servants. Grace had never seen such a spread: roasted meat, fresh vegetables, bread that was still warm from the oven, pastries that looked like art. She ate slowly, hyper-aware of her table manners, but Hadrian seemed unconcerned with protocol. He watched her eat, sipped his water, and asked her questions. Where had she grown up? A village north of Bucharest, now mostly gone. How had she ended up at the palace? She needed work after her parents died, and the palace hired humans for tasks vampires found tedious. What did she want if she could have anything in the world? Grace set down her fork. I want to matter. Not because of who I marry or what family I come from, but because of what I do. I want to be someone who made things a little better just by existing. You already are, Hadrian said quietly. I wash sheets. You gave your dress to someone who needed it more. You do your job well enough that you have been employed here for years. You came to dinner with a vampire king despite being terrified. Grace, you already matter. The question is whether you believe it. Grace felt her throat tighten. No one had ever spoken to her that way before. As though her life had weight. As though her choices meant something. Can I ask you something now? She said. Of course. What do you need? You said you need things to survive. What does that mean? Hadrian's expression became carefully neutral. I need blood. Not much, and not often, but I need it to survive. I have donors among the court, humans who are well compensated and carefully monitored. I do not hunt. I do not kill. Those laws are centuries old, and I enforce them strictly. Does it hurt them? The donors? No. It can actually be quite pleasant if done correctly. But I understand if that frightens you. Grace thought about that. It does frighten me, she admitted, but not in the way you might think. I am frightened of a lot of things about this situation. That is just one item on a very long list. That is fair. They talked for 2 more hours. Hadrian asked about her work, her friends, what she read in her spare time. Grace asked him about history, about what the world had been like 200 years ago, about whether he missed being human. He answered everything honestly, even when the answers were complicated or painful. By the time Grace left, the moon was high and her sides ached from laughing. Hadrian had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard, a way of describing centuries-old political disasters that made them sound like farcical comedy. May I see you again? Hadrian asked as they stood at the door. Yes, Grace said. I would like that. Tomorrow? I work until 8. Then I will meet you at 8:30. We can walk in the gardens. Grace nodded, then hesitated. Your Majesty. Hadrian, please. Hadrian, why are you doing this? Really? Hadrian looked at her for a long moment. Because when I watched you give away your dress, I felt something other than numb. And I have been numb for a very long time. He reached out slowly, telegraphing the movement, and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers were cool against her skin. Good night, Grace. Good night. Grace walked back to the servants' quarters in a daze. Mari was waiting up, arms crossed. Well? We talked, Grace said. Just talked. He was nice. Nice, Mari repeated flatly. The vampire king was nice. Yes, and funny, and sad, and he wants to see me again tomorrow. Mari groaned. You are falling for him. I am not. Grace, I have known you for 3 years. I can read your face. You are falling for him, and this is going to end in disaster. Grace sat on her cot and pulled off her shoes. Her feet ached from standing all day. Maybe, but Mari, when he looks at me, he sees me. Not a servant, not a pawn, just me. When was the last time anyone looked at you that way? Mari's expression softened. Never. Exactly. So maybe this is a disaster waiting to happen. But maybe it is also worth the risk. You are definitely an idiot, Grace smiled. I know. Over the following weeks, Grace and Hadrian fell into a routine. She worked her shifts in the laundry, and he managed the court's business, and in the evenings they met. Sometimes they walked in the gardens, sometimes they sat in the library and read, sometimes they simply talked about everything and nothing. Hadrian told her about the French Revolution, about fleeing Paris as the terror began. Grace told him about her parents, about the fever that had taken them within days of each other. He described the first time he had tasted human blood, the horror and ecstasy of it. She described the first time she had earned her own wages, the pride of holding those coins in her hand. Slowly, carefully, they learned each other. Grace learned that Hadrian hated the politics of court, that he spent most of his time trying to prevent the various vampire houses from starting wars with each other. that he loved music but rarely had time to listen to it, that he had not chosen to be turned, that a vampire named Lucian had done it to save his life after a battle, and Hadrian still was not certain whether to be grateful or resentful. Hadrian learned that Grace wrote poetry in her spare time, terrible poetry she would not show anyone but Mari, that she missed her village even though there was nothing left there to miss, that she was terrified of horses and had been since one had kicked her when she was 6, that she saved half her wages every month because she wanted to open a school someday, a place where children who had nothing could still learn to read, and slowly, carefully, Grace stopped being terrified. She was in the library one evening, reading aloud from a novel while Hadrian listened with his eyes closed, when she realized she was happy. Genuinely, uncomplicatedly happy. The realization startled her so much she stopped mid-sentence. Hadrian opened his eyes. "What is wrong?" "Nothing. I am happy." "That sounds like something that should be celebrated, not a problem." "I am happy sitting in a library reading to a vampire king. That is not a sentence I ever imagined saying." Hadrian smiled. It was a real smile, not the polite expression he wore at court. "I am happy listening to you read, so we are both in unprecedented territory." Grace set the book aside. "Can I ask you something?" "Always." "What happens next? With us, I mean. I know you said we would see if there was a foundation for something real. Have we found it?" Hadrian's smile faded. He stood and crossed to the window, looking out at the city lights. "Yes," he said quietly, "I believe we have. But there are complications. Grace, if I formally name you as my consort, your life changes completely. You become part of the court, subject to its laws and politics. There are people who will see you as a threat, others who will see you as an opportunity. You would not be safe. I am not safe now. Half the nobles already hate me. That is different from being a target." Grace joined him at the window. "Hadrian, I know this is complicated. I know there are risks, but I do not want to spend my life being afraid of what might happen. I want to spend it living. With me? If you will have me." Hadrian turned to face her. They stood very close, and Grace could see the flecks of silver in his dark eyes. "I am not human, Grace. I will never age. I will never die. If you choose this, there will come a day when you grow old and I do not, when you are sick and I am not, when you die and I continue. I know. Does that not frighten you?" "Of course it does, but the alternative is not knowing you at all, and that frightens me more." Hadrian reached up and cupped her face in his hands. His skin was cool, and his touch was gentle. "You are extraordinary." "I am really not. Let me disagree." He kissed her then, softly, a question more than a demand. Grace leaned into it, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. He was solid and real and here, and for a moment nothing else mattered. When they broke apart, Hadrian rested his forehead against hers. "There is something you need to know. A law, the consort statute." "What is that?" "If I name you as my consort, you would have 1 year to decide whether to be turned. If you choose not to be turned, the law requires your execution." Grace pulled back. "What?" "It is an old law, designed to prevent security risks. The reasoning is that a human consort would know too much about court business, could be kidnapped or used against the crown. The law requires that any official consort be turned within a year or be killed." Grace felt cold. "So my choices are become a vampire or die?" "Those are the legal options, yes. And you are telling me this now?" "I am telling you this before we go any further. Grace, I do not agree with the law. I think it is barbaric and unjust. But it exists, and if I name you as my consort, you would be subject to it." Grace walked away from him, her mind racing. "So everything you said, about choosing me, about spending time together, that was all leading here, to forcing me to become a vampire?" "No." Hadrian's voice was firm. "I am not forcing you to do anything. I am giving you information so you can make an informed choice. If you do not want this, if you want to walk away right now, I will not stop you. You can go back to the laundry, live your life, and I will make certain no one bothers you. But if I stay, I have to become a vampire. If you stay and I name you formally as consort, yes, the law would require it. Grace turned to look at him. And if you do not name me formally, if we just continue as we are? Then you are in danger, but not from the law, from the court. Grace, the moment I showed interest in you, you became a piece in their games. The only way to protect you is to make your position official, but doing that triggers the statute. That is impossible. There is no right answer. I know. I am sorry. Grace sat down on the nearest chair. Her hands were shaking. I do not want to be a vampire. I want to grow old. I want to have children someday, maybe. I want a human life. I know. But I do not want to lose you either. Hadrian knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. Then we find another way. We challenge the law, we change it, we work around it. Grace, I did not bring you into this world to trap you. I brought you in because I thought we could build something real. And if that means fighting the entire council to change a 300-year-old law, then that is what we do. Grace looked at him. You would do that? I would do anything for you. I think I have made that embarrassingly clear. Despite everything, Grace felt a smile tug at her lips. You knelt to me in front of 41 nobles. Yes, I think you made it clear. So we fight? Grace squeezed his hands. We fight. But Hadrian, if we cannot change the law, if the only options are turning or death, I need you to promise me something. Anything. Promise me you will not turn me against my will. Promise me you will let me choose, even if that choice is walking away. Hadrian's expression was anguished. Grace. Promise me. I promise, I swear it, your choice always, even if it destroys me. Grace leaned forward and kissed him. Then let us go to war. The council met in a chamber deep beneath the palace, in a room carved from rock centuries before Bucharest was a city. 12 vampires sat around a circular table representing the major houses and bloodlines. They were all ancient, all powerful, and all deeply irritated that Hadrian had called an emergency session. Your Majesty, said Councillor Theron, a vampire who had been old when Rome fell. We are here as you requested. I trust the matter is urgent. It is. Hadrian stood at the head of the table, Grace beside him. She wore her work dress still, had refused the formal gowns his staff tried to give her. I am formally declaring Grace Calloway as my chosen consort. Silence, then a ripple of murmurs. The laundress? Said Councillor Isidora, her voice dripping with disdain. Your Majesty, surely you are joking. I am not. This is unprecedented, Theron said. The choosing ceremony was held. You had 41 qualified candidates. You cannot simply ignore protocol and elevate a servant. I can, and I am. Grace is my choice. The question before this council is not whether you approve, but how we proceed. Councillor Valerius, younger than the others but no less sharp, leaned forward. The consort statute applies, of course. She will need to be turned within the year. That is what I wish to discuss. I am requesting a formal exception to the statute. The murmurs became louder. Theron raised a hand for silence. Exceptions are not granted lightly, Your Majesty. The statute exists for the security of the crown. The statute exists because this council is afraid of human influence, but Grace poses no security risk. She has no political connections, no family to leverage her position, no hidden agenda. She is simply a woman I have chosen to love. Love, Isidora scoffed. Your Majesty, with respect, you have known this girl for a few weeks. This is infatuation, not love. It will pass. It will not pass. Hadrian's voice was hard. And I will thank you to speak of Grace with respect, Counselor. She is here and she can hear you. Grace, who had been silent up to this point, spoke. May I say something? All eyes turned to her. She felt her heart hammering but kept her voice steady. I understand your concerns. I am no one from your perspective. I have no title, no education, no family. But I am not asking for power. I am not asking for special treatment. I am asking for the right to live my life on my terms. If that means remaining human, then I should have that choice. The law, Valerius began. Is the law just because it is old? Grace interrupted. Or should laws change when they no longer serve their purpose? Theron's eyes narrowed. You speak boldly for a human. I speak honestly. That is all I know how to do. Hadrian placed a hand on her shoulder. I am not asking for your permission, Council. I am informing you of my decision and requesting your cooperation in finding a solution. Grace will remain human if she chooses. We will work within the law or change the law, but she will not be forced. The statute cannot simply be ignored, Theron said. It was enacted for good reason, and it has stood for 3 centuries. Then perhaps it has stood long enough. The debate raged for hours. Grace sat and listened as the council argued precedent, security concerns, political implications. She said little, but when she spoke, it was with quiet conviction. She was not asking for revolution. She was asking for choice. Finally, as the night wore on, Theron raised his hand. Enough. This debate will not be resolved tonight. Your Majesty, the Council will research the matter and reconvene in 1 week with a formal decision regarding your request for exception. That is acceptable. However, Theron's gaze moved to Grace. Understand, Miss Calloway, that this Council takes its responsibilities seriously. If we determine that your presence as a human consort poses a security risk, the statute will be enforced. I suggest you use the next week to carefully consider your position. Grace met his eyes. I have considered it, Counselor. I know what I want. The Council dismissed them. As they walked back through the palace corridors, Grace felt exhaustion settling into her bones. That went well, she said dryly. They did not attack you directly. In Council terms, that is practically a warm welcome. Hadrian, what happens if they say no? If they refuse the exception? Then we escalate. We challenge the statute's validity, appeal to the larger Coven network, make enough noise that they have to reconsider. And if that does not work? Hadrian stopped walking. He turned to face her, taking both her hands. Then we run. I abdicate, we leave the court, and we live quietly somewhere they cannot find us. I am not losing you, Grace. Not to politics, not to ancient laws, not to anything. You would give up your crown? In a heartbeat. Grace felt tears prick her eyes. I do not want you to have to choose between me and your responsibilities. You are my choice. Everything else is negotiable. She kissed him then, standing in the empty corridor with moonlight streaming through the windows. He wrapped his arms around her and held her close, and for a moment the weight of the council and the statute and the impossible situation faded. We will find a way, Grace whispered. We have to. We will. But as they stood there, neither of them noticed the figure watching from the shadows, a thin vampire with silver spectacles and a calculating expression. Doran had been taking notes. Grace threw herself into research. She spent every spare moment in the palace library, pulling dusty volumes of law and history, reading through centuries of legal precedent. Mari brought her meals and scolded her for not sleeping, but Grace barely heard her. There had to be something, some loophole, some precedent, some argument that would sway the council. She was elbow-deep in a legal tome from the 1600s when a voice spoke behind her. You will not find what you seek in those books. Grace turned. An ancient vampire stood in the doorway, so old his skin seemed almost translucent. He wore robes that looked older than the palace itself. Who are you? Grace asked. I am Lucian. I was the one who turned Hadrian long ago. I have been archivist of this court for 400 years. He moved into the room with the careful precision of great age. I heard you are searching for a way around the consort statute. Yes. Do you know of one? Perhaps. But first a question. Why do you wish to remain human? Most would consider immortality a gift. Grace set down her book. Because immortality is not my choice. I want to live a human life with all its brevity and beauty. I want to age, to change, to experience everything that mortality offers. Immortality would take that from me. Lucian nodded slowly. An honest answer. Very well, come with me. He led her deeper into the library, past the public reading rooms, into a restricted section Grace had never seen before. The air here smelled of parchment and ancient dust. Lucienne pulled a leather-bound volume from a high shelf and opened it carefully. The consort statute was enacted in 1721, Lucian said. I was present when the council debated it. The official reason was security, but the true reason was fear. Fear of what? Fear of change. Several human consorts in the previous century had become quite powerful in court politics. They had children, built alliances, changed the balance of power. The old families wanted to ensure that could not happen again, so they passed the statute requiring all consorts to be turned and thus brought fully under vampire law. That is horrible. It is politics. But here is what you need to know. Lucian pointed to a passage in the book. The statute was not passed unanimously. 3 council members voted against it, arguing it was unjust and unnecessary. Their objections were recorded, but buried in the archives. If you could prove that the statute was passed on false premises, or that its justification no longer applies, you might have grounds to challenge it. Grace leaned closer, reading the faded text. Who were the dissenters? Council members who are long dead now. But their arguments were sound. They claimed the statute violated ancient law regarding personal autonomy, that no vampire, not even the king, had the right to force transformation on an unwilling human. So there is precedent for my argument. Thin precedent, but yes. You would need to build a case, gather evidence, show that the statute conflicts with older, more fundamental laws. It would be difficult, and the council would fight you every step. But it is possible. Lucian closed the book carefully. It is possible. Though I warn you, child, this path leads to war. The council does not like to be challenged, and the noble families will see your petition as an attack on their authority. You may win your freedom and lose everything else. Grace met his ancient eyes. I am already losing everything if I do nothing. This way, at least I have a chance. Then you will need help. I can guide you through the archives, show you what you need. But Grace, you must be prepared for the cost. Even if you win, there will be those who never forgive you for defying them. I know. But Hadrian said he would fight for me. So I have to fight too. Lucian studied her for a long moment, then nodded. You have courage, child. That is good. You will need it. Over the following days, Grace and Lucian worked together, assembling a case against the consort statute. They found records of dissent, examples of consorts who had remained human in earlier centuries, legal precedents that supported autonomy over security. Slowly, carefully, they built a foundation. Hadrian joined them when he could, reading through documents and offering insights from his own centuries of experience. The 3 of them worked late into the nights, surrounded by books and scrolls and the weight of history. This is remarkable, Hadrian said one evening, looking over Grace's notes. You have found more in a week than I have found in decades of looking. I had a good teacher. Grace smiled at Lucian, who inclined his head. You had motivation. That makes all the difference. Do you think it will be enough? Grace asked. Enough to convince the council? To convince some of them, perhaps, Lucian said. But there will be those who oppose you simply because you threaten their power. You must be prepared for that. I am prepared. But the next day, Grace learned exactly what opposition meant. She was walking back from the library when 3 nobles stepped out of a side corridor, blocking her path. Grace recognized them from the choosing ceremony ladies in silk who had watched her humiliation with barely concealed glee. The little laundress, said the tallest one, a woman with ice-blonde hair. How brave of you to walk these halls alone. Grace kept her voice steady. Excuse me, I need to pass. Do you? I think you need to remember your place. My place is wherever I choose to be. The blonde woman moved closer. You think because the king has taken an interest, you are protected? You are wrong. You are a novelty, a momentary distraction. When he tires of you, you will have nothing. No title, no family, no future, and we will be waiting. Is there a point to this conversation? The point, said another woman, stepping forward, is that you should walk away now, before you are hurt. Grace felt her heart hammering but kept her chin up. I appreciate your concern, but I can make my own decisions. Can you? You are playing a game you do not understand, girl. There are rules, alliances, debts that go back centuries. You have disrupted the balance, and there are those who will see you punished for it. Then they can try, but I am not leaving. The blonde woman's eyes flashed. You will regret. Is there a problem here? Hadrian's voice cut through the tension like a blade. The three nobles turned, and Grace saw their expressions shift from threatening to carefully neutral. Your Majesty, the blonde woman said smoothly. We were simply having a conversation with Miss Calloway. It looked like intimidation to me. Hadrian moved to stand beside Grace, his hand finding hers. I trust you ladies have somewhere else to be. They left quickly, whispers trailing behind them. Hadrian turned to Grace. Are you all right? I am fine. They were just trying to scare me. Did they succeed? A little, but Hadrian, I need to be able to walk around without you protecting me every moment. If I cannot handle three nobles, how can I handle the council? By being smart enough not to fight battles you do not need to. Grace, those women are dangerous. They have influence, resources, and no conscience. Do not underestimate them. I do not, but I also do not fear them. They can threaten me all they want, but I am still here. Hadrian pulled her into an embrace. You are the bravest person I have ever met. Or the most stubborn. Both. The council reconvened exactly 1 week later. Grace stood beside Hadrian in the circular chamber, her notes clutched in her hands. She had not slept in 2 days, running on determination and too much coffee. Theron called the session to order. We have deliberated on your Majesty's request for exception to the consort statute. Before we render our decision, we will hear arguments. Thank you, Counselor. Hadrian gestured to Grace. Grace Calloway has prepared a legal brief challenging the validity of the statute. I ask the council to hear her. Isadora scoffed. A laundress is going to lecture us on vampire law? A laundress who has spent the last week researching precedent and building a case, Hadrian said coldly. Yes. You will hear her, or you will explain to the larger Coven network why you refused. Theron raised a hand. She may speak. Grace stepped forward. Her hands trembled, but her voice was steady. Honored Council, I come before you not to attack your authority, but to question the foundation of a law that I believe contradicts more fundamental principles of vampire justice. She laid out her case point by point. The dissenting votes when the statute was first passed, the precedent of earlier consorts who had remained human, the ancient laws regarding autonomy and transformation. She spoke for 20 minutes, referencing documents and historical examples, building her argument like a structure of stone. When she finished, the chamber was silent. Finally, Valerius spoke. You have done your research, Miss Calloway. I will grant you that. But the statute was passed for security reasons that still apply. A human consort represents a vulnerability. Then protect me in other ways. Assign guards, limit my access to sensitive information, establish protocols. But do not force me to give up my humanity because of theoretical risks. It is not theoretical, Theron said. We have had consorts kidnapped, used for leverage, turned into weapons against us. The statute prevents that. By making me choose between two forms of death, either I lose my humanity or I lose my life. How is that justice? It is pragmatism. Grace felt anger rising. It is cruelty dressed up as policy. You are asking me to sacrifice everything I am because you are afraid of what might happen. That is not law. That is tyranny. The council erupted. Half the members were shouting, some supporting her argument, others denouncing it. Hadrian stood beside her, silent but solid, his presence a reminder that she was not alone. Finally, Lucian spoke from his place in the shadows. He rarely attended council meetings, but he had come today at Grace's request. The girl is correct. Every head turned. Lucien moved into the light, his ancient face grave. I was present when the statute was passed. I voted against it then, and I stand against it now. The law was not created to protect the crown. It was created to control it, to ensure that no king could choose a human consort who might challenge the power of the noble houses. Grace Calloway has exposed that truth, and the council must decide whether to perpetuate an unjust law or correct a 300-year-old mistake. Theron's expression was unreadable. Lucien, you overstep. I speak truth, a concept that seems to have become unfashionable in this chamber. The debate raged for hours. Grace answered questions, clarified points, defended her research. Hadrian spoke as well, making it clear that he would not back down, that he would fight this battle to the end. Finally, as midnight approached, Theron called for a vote. The question before this council: shall the consort statute be amended to allow human consorts to remain human? Should they and the crown both consent? All in favor? 6 hands rose. All opposed? 5 hands. 1 abstention. Theron's expression was grim. The motion passes. The consort statute is hereby amended. Grace Calloway may remain human, provided both she and His Majesty consent to the arrangement. Grace felt her knees go weak. Hadrian caught her, his arm around her waist. However, Theron continued, this amendment comes with conditions. Miss Calloway will submit to regular security reviews. She will maintain limited access to sensitive crown business, and this amendment applies only to her and to future consorts chosen directly by the crown. It is not a blanket repeal. Agreed, Hadrian said immediately. Thank you, Council. Do not thank us yet, Your Majesty. You have made powerful enemies tonight. The noble families will not forgive this easily. I do not need their forgiveness. I need their obedience. The council dismissed them. Grace and Hadrian walked out of the chamber together, neither speaking until they reached the upper levels. Then Grace turned and threw her arms around him. We did it! We actually did it! Hadrian held her tightly.
You did it! That was all you, Grace. Your research, your argument, your courage. I could not have done it without you. Yes, you could have, but I am grateful you did not have to. They stood in the corridor, holding each other, until
Grace started laughing. What? Hadrian asked. I just won a legal battle against a vampire council. Me, a laundress. 2 months ago I was worried about making enough money to buy new shoes. And now you are reshaping centuries-old law. You should be proud. I am terrified. That too. Grace pulled back to look at him. What happens now? The council said I made enemies. Now we move forward. We formalize your position, establish your security, and we live our lives. Let them come if they dare. You have the law on your side now. And you? Always and forever. Grace kissed him, there in the moonlit corridor, and felt the last of her fear drain away. They had fought and won. The path ahead would not be easy, but it was theirs. The following months were a whirlwind. Grace's position was formalized. She was named royal consort, though she refused most of the ceremonial duties that came with the title. She continued to work in the laundry, despite Hadrian's protests, because she needed something normal to hold on to. The noble families watched her with barely concealed hostility. There were incidents, cold shoulders, whispered insults, a few outright confrontations. But Grace had faced down the council and won. She was not intimidated by ladies in silk anymore. She and Hadrian grew closer, their relationship deepening from infatuation to something solid and real. They still had dinners together, still talked late into the night, still walked in the gardens. But now there was an ease between them, a comfort that came from having fought battles together and won. One evening, as they sat in the library, Grace brought up something that had been weighing on her mind. Hadrian, we need to talk about the future. He looked up from his book. All right. You are immortal. I am not. We have at best 60 or 70 years together, maybe less. What happens after? Hadrian was quiet for a long moment. I will grieve for a very long time. That is not fair to you. Love is rarely fair, but it is worth it. Grace reached for his hand. I need you to understand what you are signing up for. I am going to grow old. My body will fail. I will get sick, probably. I will die, and you will have to watch all of it. Are you certain you want that? I am certain I want you. However much time we have, in whatever form that takes, I want it. Grace, I have lived for centuries. I have watched empires rise and fall. I have seen everything the world has to offer. And none of it, not one moment, has meant as much to me as sitting in this library with you. You are going to make me cry. Good. Then we will match. Grace noticed the dampness in his eyes then, the way his jaw was tight. Hadrian, I know what I am choosing. I am choosing you, and all the pain that comes with losing you someday. Because the alternative is not having you at all, and that is unbearable. Grace moved to sit beside him, resting her head on his shoulder. We are a pair of fools. The best kind. They sat in silence for a while, comfortable and close. Then Grace spoke again. What will you do, after? I do not know. Rule probably because someone has to. Remember you. Honor what we built. Try not to become bitter. You are allowed to be bitter. Grief does not have rules. I will try to remember that. Grace lifted her head to look at him. Promise me something. When I am gone, do not shut yourself off from the world. Do not spend eternity alone because you are mourning me. Find joy again. Live. Grace. Promise me, Hadrian. I need to know that my death will not be your destruction. He pulled her close, his face buried in her hair. I promise, though I make no guarantees about how long it will take. That is fair. They held each other as the moon rose outside, two people standing at the intersection of mortal and immortal, choosing to love despite the inevitable ending. Time passed. Years blurred together in a way that Grace had never experienced before. She and Hadrian settled into a life that was strange and wonderful in equal measure. She worked in the laundry until she saved enough money to start her school, a small building in the city where children who could not afford education could learn to read and write. Hadrian provided funding quietly through anonymous donations, but Grace ran it herself. They traveled sometimes when Hadrian could step away from court business. They saw the Mediterranean coast, the forests of Romania, the mountains that stretched toward the east. Grace saw the world through Hadrian's eyes, and he saw it anew through hers. There were difficulties, of course. The noble families never fully accepted her. There were plots and schemes, attempts to undermine her position or drive a wedge between her and Hadrian. But Grace had learned to navigate court politics, and Hadrian protected her fiercely. Mari stayed her closest friend, scandalized and proud in equal measure. You are insane, she said regularly. But you are happy, so I suppose it worked out. It did, Grace always replied, against all odds. Lucien became a mentor and friend. He taught Grace about vampire history, about the intricacies of law and politics. You have a sharp mind, he told her once. In another life, you would have made an excellent scholar. In this life, I am a laundress who occasionally reshapes legal precedent. Precisely. The turning point came unexpectedly, 15 years after the council's vote. Grace was in her school, teaching a class of young children, when Doran appeared in the doorway. He looked uncomfortable and nervous. Miss Calloway, His Majesty requests your presence immediately. Grace dismissed the class and followed Doran to the palace. Something was wrong. She could feel it in the tension of his shoulders, the speed of their pace. Hadrian met her in his private chambers. His expression was grim. What happened? Grace asked. There has been a challenge. House Draven, one of the oldest families, is claiming that the amended consort statute is invalid. They are bringing a formal petition before the full Coven Assembly. On what grounds? They are claiming that the council did not have the authority to amend a security law without approval from the larger network. And they are arguing that my relationship with you represents a continuing security risk. Grace felt cold. They want to reinstate the original statute. Yes, and if they succeed, you would be subject to it, turn or die within the year. Can they do that? We won this fight years ago. Legally, yes. The amendment was passed by the council, but it was never formally ratified by the full Coven Assembly. House Draven is using that technicality to challenge it. Grace sat down slowly. So we fight again. We fight again. But Grace, this will be different. The Coven Assembly includes representatives from every major vampire house in Eastern Europe, hundreds of them, and many of them resent the precedent we set. They see you as a threat to the established order. What do you need me to do? Hadrian knelt in front of her, taking her hands. I need you to testify, to tell your story, to explain why you chose to remain human, to make them see you as a person rather than a political problem. I can do that. It will not be pleasant. They will question you, challenge you, try to break your resolve. Some of them will be cruel. I have dealt with cruel before. Grace squeezed his hands. Hadrian, I did not fight for 15 years to give up now. We will win this. You sound very certain. I have you. That makes me certain of anything. The Coven Assembly convened in a vast underground chamber, a space carved from living rock centuries before. Grace stood beside Hadrian on a raised platform, looking out at hundreds of vampires. They filled the chamber, pale faces in the torchlight, eyes gleaming with interest or hostility or cold calculation. House Draven's representative, a vampire named Constantine, presented their case. He was eloquent and persuasive, arguing that the amended statute represented a dangerous erosion of security protocols, that Grace's continued humanity set a precedent that would weaken the crown, that laws existed for a reason and could not be changed simply because they were inconvenient. Then it was Grace's turn. She walked to the center of the platform, very aware that she was the only human in a room full of predators. Her hands were steady. Her voice was strong. I am Grace Calloway. 15 years ago, I was a laundress. I worked in the palace, I earned my wages, and I tried to live a good life. Then the king chose me, and my life changed forever. Not because I sought power, not because I wanted status, but because we found something real in each other, something worth fighting for. House Draven argues that my humanity is a security risk, but in 15 years, I have done nothing to threaten this court. I have lived quietly, taught children, supported my partner. I have been questioned, investigated, watched constantly, and in all that time, I have been exactly what I claim to be, a human woman trying to live her life. The question before you is not whether I am dangerous. The question is whether you will allow fear to dictate your laws, whether you will force transformation on unwilling humans simply because it is easier than trusting them, whether you believe that love requires sacrifice of everything we are. I chose to remain human because I value mortality, because I believe that a finite life, fully lived, is more meaningful than endless existence, because I want to experience everything humanity offers: aging, growth, change, and yes, eventually death. That is not a security risk. That is a choice about how I want to live. Hadrian has respected that choice for 15 years. He has loved me without demanding I change, without using his power to force me to become something I am not. That is what makes him a great king, not his strength, not his age, but his willingness to value the autonomy of those he loves. I ask you now to do the same, to value choice over convenience, to trust that love can exist between mortal and immortal without requiring the erasure of one, to let the amended statute stand not just for me, but for every human who might choose this path in the future. I am not your enemy, I am not your threat. I am simply a woman asking for the right to live as she chooses, and if you cannot grant me that, then you are not the protectors of law you claim to be. You are simply afraid. She stepped back. The chamber was silent. Then, slowly, one vampire began to clap, then another, then dozens, until nearly half the assembly was applauding. Constantine looked furious. This is not a popularity contest. No, said a voice from the crowd. An ancient vampire stood, older even than Lucian. It is a question of justice, and the girl speaks truth. House Draven, your petition is denied. The amended statute stands. The vote was called. It was not even close. 3/4 of the assembly voted to uphold the amendment. House Draven's challenge failed. Grace felt her knees go weak with relief. Hadrian caught her, holding her up. You did it, he whispered. Again. We did it. As they left the chamber, vampires approached to speak with Grace, some to congratulate her, others to simply acknowledge her. She was no longer the laundress who had stumbled into court politics. She was Grace Calloway, the human who had twice reshaped vampire law, and she was done fighting. Years passed, gentler now. Grace aged, as humans do, and Hadrian remained unchanged. They faced that reality together, with honesty and grace. When Grace's hair began to gray, Hadrian said it made her look distinguished. When her joints ached, he adjusted their walks to accommodate her pace. When she grew tired more easily, he rearranged his schedule to spend more time at home. Grace continued to run her school, though eventually she trained others to take over the daily teaching. She wrote, pouring her experiences into journals and letters. She made peace with the life she had chosen, the time they had together. On her 60th birthday, they had a quiet dinner together in the gardens. The roses were blooming, the air was warm, and Hadrian had arranged for music a string quartet playing softly in the background. "Do you have regrets?" Hadrian asked as they danced slowly under the stars. "About what?" "About remaining human, about the time we will not have." Grace rested her head against his chest. She had to stand on her toes now to reach comfortably. "Not for a moment. I chose a full life over a long one. I chose to experience everything mortality offers, and I chose you for however long we have. I would make the same choice 1,000 times over." "Even knowing how it ends?" "Especially knowing how it ends. Hadrian, the ending is what makes the journey meaningful. Immortality would have robbed me of that." He held her tighter. "I will miss you so much it might kill me." "It will not kill you. You are too stubborn for that, but you are allowed to grieve. And then, eventually, you are allowed to live again." "I do not know if I can." "You will, because I am asking you to. Because our love deserves to be honored by you continuing, not stopping." They danced until the moon was high, two figures in the garden, one eternal, one fading, both choosing love despite its costs. More years. Grace watched her students grow and have children of their own. She saw her school expand, branches opening in other cities. She wrote letters to the council, advocating for legal reforms, pushing for more protections for humans in vampire society. Even in her 70s, she was still fighting, still working for change. Hadrian never left her side. He adjusted everything to accommodate her aging body, installing railings, arranging for medical care, hiring staff to help when she needed it. But he never treated her as fragile. She was still Grace, still fierce, still the woman who had stood before the Coven Assembly and demanded justice. They talked about death openly, making plans. Grace wanted to be buried in the gardens near the roses. She wanted a simple funeral, no grand ceremony. She wanted Hadrian to read a particular poem she had written for him. "You are being very pragmatic about this," Hadrian said one evening. "I am dying, love. Pragmatism seems appropriate. You are not dying yet." "No, but I will be, and I want you to be prepared." "I will never be prepared to lose you." Grace took his hand. They were sitting in the library, their favorite place. "Then let me tell you what I need. I need you to be sad, but not destroyed. I need you to remember me, but not be defined by losing me. I need you to find joy again, even if it takes decades. Can you do that?" "I do not know." "Try. For me. I will try." Grace lived to be 83 years old. In the end, it was her heart that failed, gently and without much pain. She died in the early morning, in the bed she had shared with Hadrian for decades, his hand holding hers. Her last words were, "Thank you for letting me be human." Hadrian buried her in the garden, near the roses, exactly as she had requested. He read her poem at the funeral, a small gathering of friends and students, and the few vampires who had come to respect her. Then he stood at her grave for a long time, saying his private goodbyes. The grief was crushing. For the first year, Hadrian barely functioned. He managed the court's business mechanically, but his heart was not in it. Everything reminded him of Grace, the library, the gardens, the corridors where they had walked. But slowly, painfully, he began to heal. He found Grace's journals and read them, cover to cover. She had written about their life together, about her philosophy of mortality, about her hopes for the future, including her hopes for him. "Do not let my death be your ending," she had written. "Let it be a reminder that love is worth the pain. That connection matters even when it is temporary, that choosing joy despite loss is the most human thing you can do. Hadrian took those words to heart. He continued her work, expanding the schools, pushing for legal reforms, advocating for human rights in vampire society. He established a foundation in her name, providing scholarships for children who could not afford education. He made certain her legacy lived on. And eventually, decades later, he found himself standing in the garden at dawn, looking at Grace's grave and feeling something other than grief. He felt gratitude for the years they had together, for the way she had changed him, opened his eyes to possibilities he had never considered, for the love they had built, imperfect and temporary and absolutely real. "I hope you are proud," he said to the roses. "I am trying. It is hard and I miss you every day, but I am trying." The garden was silent, but Hadrian felt a presence not supernatural, just the memory of Grace, the echo of her voice in his mind. She would be proud, he thought. She would tell him he was doing well, that grief was allowed, but so was joy, that living fully was the best way to honor her. So he lived. 40 years after Grace died, Hadrian stood in the main schoolhouse named in her honor, watching children learn to read. They were young, bright-eyed, full of potential. Some were human, some were the children of vampires, all of them learning together. A little girl approached him, perhaps 7 years old, clutching a book. "Excuse me, sir, are you the king?" "I am." "My teacher said you knew Grace Calloway, the lady who started the schools." "I did. I knew her very well." "What was she like?" Hadrian knelt so he was at the child's level. "She was brave and kind, and she believed that everyone deserved the chance to learn, to grow, to become who they were meant to be. These schools exist because she fought for people like you." "She must have been amazing." "She was the most amazing person I ever met." The child smiled and ran back to her class. Hadrian stood, looking around the schoolhouse. Grace's legacy was everywhere, in the books on the shelves, the artwork on the walls, the children learning and growing and dreaming. She had lived a human life, fully and completely, and in doing so, she had changed the world. Hadrian walked out of the schoolhouse into the sunshine. It was afternoon, overcast enough that the light would not harm him. He had learned to appreciate these moments, times when he could walk in the world Grace had loved so much, seeing it through her eyes. He missed her. He would always miss her, but he was not destroyed by the loss. He carried her with him, in his choices, in his work, in the way he moved through the world. Grace Calloway had been a laundress in a patched dress. She had given away her only good gown to a stranger. She had fought vampire law twice and won. She had lived 83 human years and changed the course of history. And she had loved a vampire king who had knelt to her in a room full of nobles, choosing her over tradition, over politics, over everything. That love had cost them both, but it had been worth every moment. Hadrian looked up at the sky, feeling the faint warmth of the sun through the clouds, and smiled. "Thank you," he said quietly, to Grace, to the world, to the life they had built together, for everything. Then he turned and walked back toward the palace, ready to continue living fully, completely, in the way Grace had taught him. Because that was what love required. Not perfection, not immortality, but the courage to choose joy despite loss, to honor what was by continuing what could be. And in that continuation, Grace lived on. Not in blood or transformation or immortal existence, but in the choices Hadrian made every day. In the schools that bore her name, in the laws that protected humans because she had fought for them. In the memory of a woman in a patched dress who had changed the world simply by refusing to compromise who she was. Years turned to decades, decades to centuries. Hadrian ruled wisely, guided by the lessons Grace had taught him. He never took another consort. Some loves, he knew, were not meant to be replaced. But he lived well. He found joy in his work, in the students who graduated from Grace's schools, in the slow but steady progress toward a more just society. He traveled, he read, he experienced the world in all its complexity. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, he would sit in the garden near Grace's grave and tell her about his day, about the victories and frustrations, the changes he had seen, the world that continued to turn. "You were right," he said one evening, centuries after her death, "about all of it. Mortality gives meaning. Choice matters. Love is worth the pain." The roses bloomed, red and white and yellow. Birds sang in the trees. The world continued. And somewhere, in memory and legacy, and the ripple effects of one brave choice made long ago, Grace Calloway smiled. Because she had lived exactly as she wanted. Fully human, fully herself. Fully alive. And that, in the end, was everything.